It wasn't pretty. It was kind of ugly and stark and immediate. The pictures were all about chaos and madness. I did everything I could to my camera to get June 6, 44 to look exactly like the Bob Capa photographs.
The war correspondent has his stake, his life, in his own hands. And he can put it on this horse or that horse, or he can put it back in his pocket at the very last gamble. I'm a gambler. I decided to go in with Company E in the first wave.
For Robert Capa, taking pictures was his way of fighting the war against fascism. Instead of carrying a gun, he carried a camera.
His works, I think, taught us a lot because, you know, he dealt with a very cruel circumstance.
He wasn't just an observer. He was really as humane as maybe they don't come like anymore. He really liked people, and I think this is also why people liked him.
Robert Capa was born in Paris at the age of 22. He had arrived a few years earlier, a refugee from Nazi Germany. Before he became Robert Capa, his name was Andre Friedman. This photograph, published in a Berlin journal, was taken in Budapest during a demonstration against the Hungarian dictator Miklos Horthy. One of the demonstrators was 17-year-old Andre Friedman. He was wounded by a policeman's saber and later arrested.
In the big square police headquarters, Horthy's chief of police whistled Beethoven's Fifth while beating up long-haired men. I was a young man of 17 with very long hair. The next morning, the police commissioner called my mother and told her that if I left Hungary in 24 hours, certain questions would not be asked.
The next day, he left for Berlin.
He went to Berlin in order to learn that which is new. Berlin was the great attraction, socially, economically, politically. It was dynamic. Things were happening.
The Nazis were not yet in power when Capa arrived in Germany. Berlin was the cultural capital of the world. Capa enrolled in journalism classes at the radical School for Political Studies. He wanted to become a newspaper reporter to fight fascism with words. He moved into a sleazy boarding house and scraped by with a small allowance. When his money ran out, his landlady evicted him.
I had always loved the feel of rain on my face. But now the rain, without touching my face, went right to my shoes. I had never thought that poverty had anything to do with shoes. Now when I look at poor people, I glance at their feet.
For me, he was Bundy. We called him Bundy, never Capa, because it was much later came this name.
Eva Beshnio was a childhood friend from Budapest. She had just opened her own photography studio in Berlin.
He came and visited me, and he said to me, "Is photography a nice profession? Just like this." And I said, "Bundy, you can't speak about photography on this manner."
Photography was flourishing in Berlin. Some of the best photojournalists were represented by an agency called Defot, which was run by a Hungarian.
I brought him to Defot, and I said, I have here a very nice boy, very intelligent and smart. Can't you give him some job? He said, okay, let him come. I brought Capa to photography, and I'm very proud of it.
Capa ran errands and worked in the darkroom for a year. Then an extraordinary opportunity arose. Leon Trotsky was going to speak in Copenhagen, and all of the Defot photographers were busy.
Capa said, let me go. I make a photograph of him. Let me try.
And the photographs were published to great success, not only in Germany, but elsewhere.
Capa was on the brink of a great career at the age of 18, but his success in Germany was doomed. Just a few months later, Hitler seized power, and Capa wisely left the country.
It was not possible to stay. For him, he was Jewish, he was leftist, no, and the whole Defot where he worked was finished because it was too leftist.
Capa was a displaced person all of his life.
He was looking at life through that part, that eye. What he was, he never forgot who he was, where he came from. I think he had, as you say, a chip on his shoulder.
Andrei Friedman grew up in Budapest, a city divided by wealth, class, and geography. As a boy, he roamed through the graceful streets of Buda, where wealthy aristocrats whiled away the hours in elegant cafes. Then he would head home across the Danube River to the bustling district of Pest, where his parents ran a custom tailoring shop. Their modest apartment was crowded with workers making stylish clothes for the rich people of Buda.
The business person of our family was my mother, who really was a very hardworking lady. And my father was a very light-hearted fellow. He didn't really believe that work was a very essential part of a Hungarian man's life. And came around 6 p.m., he would want to slip out of the house and go and play cards.
On the Pest side stood the Café Modern, where the tailors of Budapest held their daily meetings, which began with complaints about business and ended with pinochle.
Dezo gambled with petty cash from the family business and often lost it all.
I disapproved of his way of life, and I admired my mother's sturdy, strong character. So I became a sturdy, strong character young fellow, and my brother became a gambler.
One of Capa's first assignments in France was to photograph resort life along the Riviera. He spent all of his advance money in a week. When questioned, he insisted that he had to experience the high life in order to photograph it. He was so sorry, but his employer's Leica had been stolen on the beach when he went for a swim. Back in Paris, he couldn't get an assignment, but he kept taking pictures.
He used to come and have his photographs developed in my father's little darkroom. And when Bob didn't have time to stay, he just dumped his film in front of the door, because he was always running around like mad.
Capa had absolutely no success with getting jobs from French editors. Perhaps it was very difficult to become disciplined. In fact, discipline only arrived with Gerda.
Gerda Pohorilis was also a Jewish refugee from Nazi Germany. Like Capa, she had been jailed for protesting against fascism and had barely escaped to Paris.
Gerda was able to speak French and other languages, and she was always beautifully made up, and she was very vivacious.
Their relationship would be stormy and complicated, but in the summer of 1935, they were simply in love.
Never before in my life have I been so happy. Now, only the pick and the spade could separate Gerda and me.
When they got back, they found a one-room apartment near the Eiffel Tower.
I knew that it was the greatest thing in his life at the time. He was really, it was passion.
Gerda introduces me to every editor and writes articles besides. On the other hand, she not only doesn't darn my socks, she doesn't do anything about the holes in her stockings. She runs around so much that she wears one out every day.
She would go around and sell the pictures to editors. She was very persuasive, but not quite persuasive enough. It was time for a new strategy. And they decided they would invent an American photographer named Robert Capa. Very successful, so famous that nobody could ever really get close to him. He was always away on assignment or at some glamorous resort on vacation. The name Capa seems to be a play on the name of Frank Capra, who had just won an Academy Award.
And then Gerda decided that she, fancying Greta Garbo, would call herself Gerda Taro, and that they would work together as partners.
Eventually, the ruse was discovered that Andre Friedman was making the photographs that Gerda was selling as Robert Capa's. And what they decided at that point was that since the photographs were so good and they were getting published, that Andre Friedman might just as well become Robert Capa.
People say he created his own character, but he fit it. He created a character that took advantage of all his innate qualities. I mean, if you had written a character like Bob Capa and you knew him, you'd say, the perfect person to play this role is Bob Capa.
Dear good mother, I'm working under a new name. My name is now Robert Capa. It's like being born again, but this time without hurting anybody.
No puede hablarse de la guerra de España.
You can't talk about the war in Spain without talking about Capa and his photographs, but very particularly about this photograph.
Es que retrata el momento.
It portrays the moment a man dies,
Recibe la muerte. Y la recibe, como decía
and he
nuestro
receives
poeta,
death,
en un
as our
poema
poet
que hay
Miguel says.
de Miguel sobre eso, la recibe
He
de
receives
pie,
death on his feet,
cayendo,
falling,
pero de pie.
but on his feet.
Pierde la vida y mantiene la dignidad.
He loses his life, but maintains his dignity. Fascist planes bombed Madrid with support from Hitler and Mussolini.
Madrid estaba sitiado.
Madrid was under siege.
Madrid fuimos un campo de experimentación.
Madrid was an experimentation for the most modern weapons made in Germany.
Alemania. Bombardeaban, estábamos.
They bombed us when we were in line buying bread.
Venían los bombardeos y no sabíamos.
They bombed us and we never knew when the planes would come and kill us.
He was more than anxious to show the effects of the war on the common people. And the pictures he was able to shoot showed the population in a state of terror.
Pictures he caught of the people under bombardment are extraordinary. Of course, what's not seen there, but you have to know that he was standing there while they were running. There were no smart bombs in those days, and the bombs just came out of there in strings and fell wherever they fell.
Always the same. The sirens, the panic rush, the fracas of the bombs. Then as the dust settles, people go off to the morgue to see if, by chance, the son, the father, the mother that did not come home is on the lists.
What did this woman do? She was certainly neither a Republican nor a supporter of Franco. She was a human being living her life, asking, what is the reason why this happened? What did I do to make this happen? This is the great tragedy. And that's what Capa knew how to express. Capa's photographs were published in journals and magazines around the world. Volunteers from all over the world came to fight for democracy in Spain. Gerda Taro, a passionate supporter of the Spanish Republic, came to Spain with Capa as a journalist. He taught her how to take pictures, and they worked together, side by side. This was a cause they were willing to die for. They risked their lives many times to cover the fighting up close. In the aftermath of one terrible battle, Gerda said, "When you think of all the fine people who have been killed, you get the feeling that somehow it's unfair to still be alive." In July 1937, fighting broke out in the town of Brunete, just west of Madrid. Gerda grabbed her camera and raced to the scene.
It was the most violent. Lasted for 21 days, and casualties were very heavy. What can I tell you? 2 battalions went in and 1 battalion came out.
A general ordered Gerda to leave, but she refused. Nothing could hold her back as she raced across the battlefield, taking pictures as she ran.
My whole squad died, practically. And one of them died right over there.
The Loyalist soldiers began to retreat. Tanks and trucks careened through the field, bombarded by planes and artillery fire. In the chaos and panic, a Loyalist tank swerved out of control. Gerda was riding on the running board of a car when the tank crashed into her. She died the next day.
Capa learned of her death by reading the newspaper. Sitting in a dentist chair, he turned the page, and there was the headline, Gerda Taro killed at Brunete.
A huge procession accompanied Gerda's body to a cemetery in Paris. She would have been 26 years old that day. Louis Aragon, editor of Ce Soir, came to the funeral with Capa.
I saw him crying. It was very strange. And Aragon was holding him. And we came from the cemetery. The death of Gerda was terrible.
All his hope and all his future disappeared in once. It changed him. I'm sure he changed completely in this time.
Dear Mother, I'm so nervous and crazy. All I can do is pull myself together and work hard. With time, I shall be more tolerable.
Capa's photographs captured the horror of the Spanish Civil War. Picture Post declared that he was the greatest war photographer in the world. He was 25 years old. In June 1940, Paris fell to the Nazis. Capa was on assignment in Mexico when he heard the terrible news.
Dear little brother, European news is miserable and it depresses me very much. The world was never as sad as it is now.
Three months later, German planes began bombing London. Capa arrived to cover the Blitz for Life magazine. From England, Capa went to New York City. His mother and brother had moved there a few years earlier and were living on the Upper West Side. Julia was thrilled to have both of her sons with her.
She had been, in fact, uprooted, and she clung to Capa. And he wasn't here that much, you know.
Bob, of course, was Julia's favorite son. From the moment that Bob was born, because he had this little 6 extra finger, she thought that he was going to be a very special person. He knew how to keep her happy with a minimum of time. For example, when she went to Paris, he would send her roses to her hotel room, and he would introduce her to all his friends and take her around, but then he would vanish again.
Capa went west to photograph an elk hunt.
I have become a complete cowboy. They are big, tough, and healthy, and have so much fun at whatever they are doing. They don't really give a damn what's happening in Europe.
He was working for Life magazine on stories that took him all across America. Everywhere he went, he managed to connect with people. In spite of his unusual way of speaking.
His accent was Hungarian, and his English, although very clear, had this very definite European accent.
He spoke, of course, in this language that he called Capanese, which was a horrible English. I think he was impossible to imitate. Capanese was a language that only was spoken by one person in the world, and that was Capa.
Capa was getting restless doing lightweight stories for Life magazine. He desperately wanted to get back to Europe, but he couldn't get a visa. When America entered the war, Capa, as a Hungarian citizen, was suddenly an enemy alien. He was ordered to turn in his cameras and not to leave New York. He sent a letter in his own defense to the State Department.
I wrote to immigration that I was born in Budapest, that the Hungarian consulate since Hitler's annexation of Hungary refuses to say that I'm not Hungarian, nor will they say that I am. That so long as Hitler is in charge of Hungary, I definitely refuse to say that I'm Hungarian.
He ended by saying that he hated the Nazis and hoped that his pictures could be used against them. In April 1942, he finally got his visa and left for London.
I told her the facts about my dancing. She said my rumba wasn't really bad and could be improved in no time. I answered that in 10 years no one had succeeded in making any improvements. She said she had a brand new idea. I was afraid I had one too.
Capa called her Pinky, after her strawberry blonde hair. They met in England while Capa was waiting for accreditation from the U.S. Army. She was married to a pilot, which made her just unavailable enough. To prepare for life at the front, he had a special uniform made by a Bond Street tailor. He said goodbye to Pinky and left for North Africa.
I told her that I was a gypsy and a newspaperman, that I was very sorry and very glad, because she was far too lovely.
In Tunisia, he joined American troops as they advanced against the Germans.
Dear Mother, I would love to be able to bring your birthday present myself, but Rommel is keeping us still busy here.
From North Africa, Capa went to Sicily to cover the Allied invasion. He spent 7 months with American troops in the hard fight for Italy.
I dragged myself from mountain to mountain, from foxhole to foxhole, taking pictures of mud, misery, and death. Every 5 yards a foxhole. In each at least one dead soldier.
Capa was with General Patton in Sicily when Palermo surrendered. In the ruined city of Naples, he photographed a tragic story. Young boys had turned on the Germans, their hated allies, shooting at them with whatever weapons they could find. Many of the boys were killed.
Inside the room were 20 primitive coffins, not well enough covered with flowers and too small to hide the dirty little feet of children. These children of Naples had stolen rifles and bullets and had fought the Germans for 14 days. These were my truest pictures of victory.
After nearly a year at the front, Capa longed to get back to London and to Pinky. He knew that the invasion of France was imminent. He was glad to find Pinky waiting for him. They moved into a suite at the posh Dorchester Hotel and proceeded to spend his royalty checks in style. Journalists from all the Allied countries were gathering in London to wait for the invasion of France. Ernest Hemingway arrived. He and Capa had become friends during the war in Spain.
His nickname was Papa, and I soon adopted him as a father. To prove my devotion and prosperity, I decided to give him a party. The attraction of free booze combined with Mr. Hemingway proved irresistible.
It was a time of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. Capa was certainly one of the liveliest of the partiers and the most reckless of the gamblers.
People say that gamblers like to lose. But the big thrill is to lose everything and then to be reborn.
Hundreds of ships set out under cover of night to carry Allied soldiers into the most decisive and brutal battle of the war, the invasion of Normandy.
At 4 a.m., we were assembled on the open deck. 2,000 men stood in perfect silence. Whatever they were thinking, it was some kind of prayer.
Capa chose the most dangerous mission, to go in with the first soldiers to land on Omaha Beach. He would be the only photographer in the first wave.
We got out of the boat and started wading. And then I saw men falling and had to push past their bodies. The bullets tore holes in the water around me and I made for the nearest steel obstacle. My picture frames were filled with shrapnel smoke, burnt tanks, and sinking barges. Every piece of shrapnel found a man's body. I did not dare to take my eyes off the finder and frantically shot frame after frame.
Everything came apart. All that we trained for just seemed to go by the boards. And I was so exhausted physically and mentally that I just collapsed in that spot. It was a struggle not against the Germans, it was a struggle to survive, to save your life. And fortunately, I was able to do that.
This photograph of Ed Regan is one of Capa's few surviving pictures of D-Day. A nervous darkroom assistant in London ruined most of the negative. Life magazine published all of them.
And I'm only sad that the other 134 shots that were destroyed in the laboratory couldn't have been witnessed by the entire world, because he probably got the greatest photo record of that invasion and that morning.
That morning, Capa had pulled himself onto a barge full of wounded and dying men bound for England. He was offered a plane to take him to London, but he refused. He returned to the beachhead on the first available boat. Nearly 10,000 Allied soldiers died on the shores of Normandy. Capa stayed with American troops as they fought their way through France.
When you're taking risks and your life is in danger, your adrenaline is pumping so high. You are feeling more alive the closer you are to death than in normal circumstance.
The shells started raining down on us, and I jumped into a big ditch, scared to death. And this man jumps in. He's very calm through this whole thing, and he like picks up a conversation as though, and he starts talking about Tolstoy. I'll never forget that. It's like this was just some noise going around. You'd hear a yell every once in a while, a scream. But he paid no attention to that. He just kept talking to me. And he calmed me down. Then the shelling died away, and he kind of smiled at me and said goodbye and hopped out again and disappeared. And I crawled out, and I said, somebody, who's that? And they said, this is a photographer named Capa. And that was the only time I ever saw him.
Capa found himself really loved by the American soldiers and officers. He was a good man to have around. Many units even came to regard him as a good luck, that if they had Bob Capa with them, things were going to go well.
Capa took all the same risks as the soldiers he photographed, from the beaches of Normandy to the Battle of the Bulge. In northern France, he prepared for his most harrowing experience of the war.
That picture was taken when I was 19 years old. I heard this voice saying, "Soldier, would you mind standing up? I'd like to take your picture." I think the reason he wanted to take my picture was the fact that I had the Cheyenne Warlock. We had a Cheyenne Indian in my demolition section. And as a result, we used to go into combat with a Cheyenne Warlock. You have something, hey, we're different, we're rough, we're tough, we're better.
Capa had volunteered to parachute into Germany with the 17th Airborne Division. They would be jumping directly into enemy fire.
It was very fearless in a sense, almost reckless. The idea was to get the photograph, and he would go to almost any lengths to get close action, good photographs. Part of you isn't thinking or feeling, and part of you is. You know you're going, hell, the plane's in the air, you know you're going. And you're not exactly sure what's going to be there when you get there. You know what is supposed to be there.
I started to think over my whole life. It was like a movie where the projection machine has gone crazy. I saw everything I ever ate, ever did, and I got to the end in 12 minutes flat. 600 feet below us was the Rhine. The green light flashed, and the boys yelled, "Umbriago!"
17,000 men parachuted into the Rhine Valley that day. More than a third of them died there.
The most amazing thing I ever saw is the way everybody just lies on the ground when they get down. It seemed like 2 minutes and everybody was just lying there.
They were shooting at you as you were coming down. So sometimes some of the troops didn't quite make it to the ground alive.
10 yards away were tall trees. Some of the men who had jumped after me had landed in them, and now they were hanging helplessly.
That's the last good photograph of my right foot, because I left my right foot in Europe. War is gruesome, and somebody has to show it. I often wonder if I could have done it, to be perfectly honest with you. It was one thing to be going someplace where they're throwing things at you when you can shoot back. If you don't have anything but a camera, you don't stop bullets with cameras.
Capa entered Leipzig with the United States Army. German snipers kept firing even after the city had surrendered. Capa climbed onto the balcony of an apartment building where American soldiers were shooting back.
The boy had a clean, open, very young face, and his gun was still killing fascists. I clicked my shutter. That was the last one of the boy alive.
For Capa, the most important moment of the war had been the liberation of Paris.
The road to Paris was open, and every Parisian was out in the street to touch the first tank, to kiss the first man. Never were there so many who were so happy so early in the morning. I felt that this entry into Paris had been made especially for me. On a tank made by Americans, I was returning to Paris, the beautiful city where I first learned to eat, drink, and love. Thousands of faces in the finder of my camera became more and more blurred. That finder was very, very wet. We drove through the quarter where I had lived for 6 years, and my concierge was waving a handkerchief, and I was yelling to her from the rolling tank, "C'est moi! C'est moi!"
Capa had been fighting fascism for nearly a decade, in Spain, in China, in North Africa, and all of Europe. He was 32 years old, and the war was finally over. Capa was at the Ritz bar in Paris with the writer Irwin Shaw when they saw an astonishing sight. Ingrid Bergman walking up the stairs. They immediately sent a note to her room.
We were planning on sending you flowers inviting you to dinner this evening.
But after consultation, we discovered it was possible to pay for the flower or the dinner, but not both. So Mother went to dinner and she found Bob Capa tremendously charming and amusing. And in fact, she fell in love with him.
Bergman was on a whirlwind tour of Europe to entertain American troops. When Capa went to Berlin on assignment, they found each other again.
It's your merry mind that I love, and there are very few merry minds in a man's life.
Bergman had just won an Academy Award for her starring role in Gaslight. She soon had to return to Hollywood for her next film. She was starring in Alfred Hitchcock's romantic thriller, Notorious. Halfway through production, Capa arrived. He got on the set as a still photographer.
Capa reached a certain point in his career when he no longer wanted to be a war photographer, and he thought he might like to go in the movie business. The movie business, unlike war, is quite boring. Well, quite like war in that you're bored a lot of the time and you get a little action sporadically. And Capa found it very boring.
Capa came to the set every day, but he and Bergman had to be very careful not to show their feelings in public. Years later, She would reveal their affair in her autobiography.
This part of being in love with Capa while she was married was not easy at all, she says, because I was so moral, so prudish, you might say, but I wanted very much to be with him.
While waiting for chances to see Bergman alone, Capa explored the Hollywood social scene.
He was, of course, socially very acceptable. First of all, he was nice looking, had a good sense of humor, he was famous in a certain circle, and he was a single man.
But Capa was not happy in Tinseltown.
He said to me, I hate to go to people's houses. And that's why I don't like L.A., because in L.A. everything takes place in people's houses. I want to be in a cafe, so when I get finished, I get up and I go to the next place.
Bored on the set and restless in Hollywood, Capa looked for other ways to entertain himself. He briefly became Hamza the Egyptian in a B-movie called Temptation.
Where's Abdallah? Abdallah's sick. Me cousin, doing work. Me Hamza.
All right, bring us the coffee, Abdallah.
Me Hamza.
Never mind, make it quick.
He decided that the movie business was not for him.
Hollywood is the biggest mess of shit I ever stepped in.
He said goodbye to Bergman and left to do a story in Turkey.
Mother was ready to ask for a divorce and marry Capa, but Capa said, I cannot marry you. If they say Korea tomorrow and we're married and have a child, I won't be able to go to Korea, and that's impossible. I'm not the marrying kind.
So that's it. You won't stay here, and I can't go with you.
It would be the wrong thing.
Apparently, Alfred Hitchcock wrote Rear Window inspired to this love affair between my mother and Bob Capa.
Can you see me driving down to the fashion salon in a Jeep, wearing combat boots and a 3-day beard? Will that make a hit?
Well, I could see you looking very handsome and successful in a dark blue flannel suit.
Now, let's stop talking nonsense, shall we?
Guess I'd better start setting up for dinner.
He wasn't made to be married. I mean, he was a single person. He loved to be surrounded by friends, girls, but to attach himself down someplace with somebody, I think he was really afraid of it.
I'm a newspaperman again, and it is all right. I sleep in strange hotels, read during the night. It's good to work, to think, to be lonely.
In New York City in the spring of 1947, Capa realized a lifelong dream. He called it Magnum.
We chose that name on account of when we were meeting. It was a bottle of champagne. Though I don't drink that stuff. I'm for red wine.
His idea was to form a cooperative of independent photographers. First, he convinced his old friend Shim to join him. Shim persuaded Henri Cartier-Bresson, and the three musketeers were together again. George Roger, an English photographer Capa had met during the war, signed on as the fourth founding member.
Oh my God, that was something. Because they were so far apart, you know, from background, education, everything. I mean, it was amazing the way they could actually work together.
The big thing which Capa brought by creating Magnum is to be independent.
I think he invented the idea of photographers owning their own negatives so that they can sell the pictures to more than one magazine at a time.
That was what we were fighting for, to control our works. And it's a way to be respected and not to be employees and tools of big magazines. That was the main thing of Magnum.
Capa brought many talented young photographers into Magnum.
Some people said Magnum is a family. In a way, yes. Obviously, father of the family was Capa, and we would all go to him to complain. if no job, if no money. And he would listen, and he would really put forward some ideas for big projects.
Magnum's reputation was growing as the agency representing the best photojournalists. Capa himself was famous, not just as a legendary war photographer, but as a celebrated man about town. In the summer of 1948, Capa went to the south of France to photograph Francois Gillot and Pablo Picasso.
It was not for a day, it came for about 2 weeks. That also was probably his method. You see, he would live with you, spend the day with you doing what you were doing. He did not simmer, taking a photograph a little bit more like this, a little more like that, or waiting for the exact light, etc. No, he felt like it, bang.
Capa had become the man he invented, a successful American photographer, always away on assignment, photographing and hobnobbing with the rich and famous around the world.
He was terribly anxious about having enough money to keep things rolling. And he was actually tired of carrying all the burdens of Magnum on his shoulders.
To escape from his troubles, Capa raced around Europe, photographing movie stars, doing stories about resort life for illustrated and holiday magazines.
I think he was playing in life and happy, fun, drinker, party, lover.
It was a great opportunity for him, and after 2 weeks he was unfortunately offered an assignment by Life magazine to cover the French war in Indochina. I called Tokyo. I said, Bob, you know, you don't have to go. This isn't our war.
Cornel Capa was distraught to learn that his brother might go into another war.
I much appreciate your calling, but be assured that I didn't take the job from a sense of duty, but with real great pleasure.
I think that the struggle was for him to get again to Capa. He wanted to work again, and that he hoped to do in Vietnam.
What amazed me about Capa was that he was a legendary figure, and he'd covered 4 wars before he came to Vietnam. I expected somebody, well, really a lot older in age, and actually he was very young, I thought. I thought he was very young. I was 29, he was 40. He was very glad the Vietnamese people were winning the war, very glad, as was I. There was no question about that. It was an ardent feeling we had.
Capa photographed Vietnamese people living in the shadow of war. He planned to call his story Bitter Rice. The war was almost over, and the French were retreating. Capa joined a French convoy on a last-ditch mission in the Red River Delta. The roads and fields were mined everywhere by both sides. Capa was riding with a few soldiers and reporters. They warned him not to leave the convoy.
He had a very famous saying, which was something like, if your picture is not good enough, you were not close enough.
I don't think he was careless. He said this many times. I will be totally careful except when there's only one place from which I can take a picture, and the picture I want. He said, then I'm going to go there.
When the trucks halted, Capa told his fellow journalists, I'm going up the road a little bit. Look for me when you get started again.
I mean, just looking at the pictures, you could see he was sticking with the soldiers. He was a pro.
This is the last picture Robert Capa ever took. He had stepped on a landmine.
They rushed to where Capa's body was, but there was no way to save him. He was gone by the time the ambulance came.
Robert Capa was given a military funeral in Hanoi. He was the first American war correspondent to die in Vietnam.
We marched behind the casket. It was really very moving.
Capa's body was sent home. The Army offered to bury him at Arlington National Cemetery. Julia said her son was not a soldier, but a man of peace. He was buried in a Quaker cemetery just outside New York City.
Cornell stood and put a prayer shawl over and recited Kaddish.
And Julia wanted to jump into the grave. And Julia was beyond herself for years. She never got over his death.
Robert was her pride and joy, the light of her life. But she was also extremely angry. She was angry at the whole business that put him in harm's way at a time that he really should have retired from harm's way.
Capa had covered countless battles in 5 wars fought in 10 different countries. He left behind 70,000 negatives, an extraordinary record of the darkness of war and the light of the human spirit.
It's a way of loving to take pictures and hating at the same time, fighting. Must keep on.